The dry season had come to the village of Inafe. The nights were long and warm, and the hostel of Inafe High School, perched on the edge of the forest, stood quietly under the moonlight. At midnight, however, the quiet was broken. Heavy footsteps echoed across the roof of the hostel, loud and deliberate. The sound was strange, too heavy for a human and too purposeful for an animal. It sent shivers through the students as they huddled in their bunks. At first, they tried to dismiss it. "It's just the wind," one of the boys, Ikena, whispered as he pulled his blanket over his head. His words were unconvincing, even to himself. His dorm mate, Amaka, rolled her eyes. "Wind doesn't sound like someone stomping across the roof," she hissed back. The rest of the students lay silently in their beds, straining to hear what would happen next. When the footsteps stopped, relief washed over them like a cool breeze. But then, as if mocking their hope, a loud thud echoed from the far end of the roof, followed by a low growl. It was faint but unmistakable. Fear settled over the dormitory like a heavy fog. The head prefect, Tade, sat upright in his bed. He had been at Inafe High for 3 years and had heard all kinds of ghost stories, but nothing like this. Determined not to let panic spread, he called out, "Everyone, stay calm. It's probably just an animal. We'll check it out in the morning." His tone was steady, but his heart pounded. Deep down, he knew this was no ordinary animal. By morning, the incident had become the only topic of discussion. Students whispered to each other as they dressed for breakfast, their eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling. Some claimed to have seen a shadow move across the roof from their window, while others swore they heard the growl again long after the footsteps stopped. Tade called a meeting in the dining hall to address the growing anxiety. "We don't know what it was," he began, standing at the front of the room. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out. The school staff will be informed, and they'll take care of it." His words were meant to reassure, but the uncertainty in his voice only heightened the tension. As the day wore on, rumors began to spread. Amaka, always the curious one, cornered her friend Ao during break time. "Did you hear what Chika said? She thinks it's a demon." Ao laughed nervously. "Chika believes everything is a demon. It's probably just a wild animal." But as night approached, even the most skeptical students couldn't shake their unease. The hostel was unusually quiet, the usual laughter and chatter replaced by a tense silence. Everyone waited, dreading the return of the footsteps. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder and more deliberate, as if whatever was on the roof wanted to make its presence known. The sound moved from one end of the roof to the other, pausing directly above the students' beds. Amaka, who had been pretending to sleep, opened her eyes and froze. A faint shadow flickered across the moonlit wall, its shape unnatural and terrifying. "I saw it," she whispered urgently to Ao, who lay in the bunk next to hers. "There's something up there." Ao wanted to dismiss her, but the fear in Amaka's voice was undeniable. Then, without warning, a loud crash came from the far end of the hostel. It sounded as though something heavy had leapt off the roof and landed on the ground. Screams erupted from the dormitory as students bolted upright in their beds. Tade, who had been keeping watch, grabbed a flashlight and ran to the window. The beam of light illuminated the courtyard, but there was nothing there. No movement, no tracks, nothing to explain the noise. The headmaster, Mr. Adedeji, arrived shortly after, summoned by the commotion. His stern face was pale as he listened to the students' accounts. "This is an old building," he said finally. "Perhaps the roof is unstable. I'll have it checked tomorrow." But his words did little to comfort the students. The next day, Tade decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. He approached Ao and Amaka during lunch. "There's something the headmaster isn't telling us," he said. "I think we need to speak to someone who knows the history of this place." Ao hesitated. "You mean the village elder?" he asked. Tade nodded. "Elder Ezen has lived here longer than anyone. If anyone knows what's happening, it's him." That afternoon, the three of them left the school grounds and walked to Elder Ezen's compound. The old man sat under a large mango tree, his wrinkled hands busy weaving a basket. He looked up as they approached, his sharp eyes glinting with curiosity. "Children, what brings you here?" he asked in a voice that was both gentle and commanding. Tate explained everything: the footsteps, the growl, and the shadow. Elder Ezen listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Tate finished, the elder sighed heavily. "It is as I feared," he said. "The demon has returned." Elder Ezen motioned for the children to sit and began his story. Many years ago, before this land became a school, it was the home of a powerful demon named Ikaro. But do not mistake him for evil. Ikaro was a protector, a guardian of the village. He kept us safe from invaders and wild beasts. Amaka leaned forward, her eyes wide. "So what happened?" she asked. The elder's face grew somber. The villagers became greedy. They began to take Ikaro's protection for granted, demanding more and more from him. When he refused, they turned on him. They performed a ritual to bind him, trapping him beneath the earth. Ao shuddered. "And now he's back?" "Yes," the elder replied. "Something must have disturbed his rest. But he is no longer the protector he once was. His anger has consumed him, and he seeks vengeance." Tate swallowed hard. "What can we do?" Elder Ezen fixed them with a piercing gaze. "If you wish to save your school and your friends, you must find a way to appease him. But be warned, the path will be dangerous." The students returned to the hostel with a sense of purpose, but also a heavy weight of responsibility. They knew they had to act quickly before Ikaro's wrath escalated. But where to begin? Elder Ezen had mentioned a ritual, but he hadn't told them how to perform it. That night, as the footsteps resumed, Tate stayed awake, listening intently. The sound was almost rhythmic, like a drumbeat. It reminded him of the stories his grandmother used to tell about spirits who communicated through sound. Maybe the footsteps are a message, he thought. The next morning, he shared his theory with Amaka and Ao. "What if Ikaro is trying to tell us something?" he said. Amaka frowned. "But how do we figure out what he wants?" Ao's face lit up. "The library," he exclaimed. "There are old records there. Maybe we can find something about the ritual Elder Ezen mentioned." With newfound determination, the trio made their way to the school library, unaware of the dangers that awaited them as they delved deeper into the demon's past. The library at Ogan High School was ancient, filled with dusty shelves and books that seemed older than time itself. Tate, Amaka, and Ao entered the quiet space, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. They were not just looking for information. They were racing against time to stop the nightly terror of Ikaro before it consumed them all. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mama Ovi, looked up from her desk as they approached. Her sharp eyes seemed to pierce through their nervous demeanor. "What are you children looking for?" she asked in a low, raspy voice. "We're doing research on the history of the land where the school was built," Tate replied carefully. They didn't want to alarm her by mentioning demons or footsteps. Mama Ovi nodded slowly and gestured to the far corner of the library. "The archives are there. Be careful with the old records. They crumble like dry leaves." The trio hurried to the corner, where stacks of faded papers and books lay untouched. Amaka pulled out a leather-bound journal that smelled of age and dust. The title read, "Chronicles of Ogan Village." As she flipped through the pages, she stopped at a passage marked with strange symbols. "Tate, look at this," she whispered. The passage spoke of a guardian spirit named Ikaro who protected the village but was betrayed by its people. "It says that Ikaro's power was sealed with 3 sacred objects," Amaka explained. "A mask, a drum, and a staff. They were buried in separate places to prevent him from returning." Ao frowned. "But he's already back. What could that mean?" Tate leaned closer, his eyes scanning the text. "Maybe something disturbed one of the objects," he suggested. "If we can find and restore them, it might calm him down." As they left the library, clutching notes about the sacred objects, Mama Ovi called out to them. "Be careful with what you're digging into," she said, her voice tinged with an edge of warning. "Some things are better left alone." The words lingered in their minds as they returned to the hostel. That night, the footsteps on the roof were louder and angrier. The sound seemed to rattle the very walls of the building. Amaka lay awake, clutching her blanket, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed outside. She leapt out of bed and peered out of the window. A shadowy figure loomed near the edge of the forest, its form barely visible under the pale moonlight. It didn't move, but seemed to stare directly at her. Amaka stumbled back, her breath coming in short gasps. When she told Tade and Ao the next morning, Tade's jaw tightened. "We're running out of time," he said grimly. "If we don't act soon, Ikaro's anger will destroy us all." The notes from the library mentioned that the mask was buried near the old Irako tree at the edge of the forest. This tree was infamous among the students, its towering branches casting eerie shadows that seemed alive at night. Few dared to go near it, even during the day. Tade, Amaka, and Ao stood at the base of the tree, armed with a spade borrowed from the school's groundskeeper. The forest was unnervingly quiet, the usual chirping of birds and rustling of leaves absent. "Let's get this over with," Ao muttered, his eyes darting nervously. As they dug, the air around them grew colder. Amaka shivered and glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the shadow from the night before. After what felt like hours, their spade hit something hard. "It's here," Tade said, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and fear. They unearthed a small wooden box, its surface etched with symbols similar to those in the library journal. Inside was a mask carved from dark wood, its features sharp and intimidating. As soon as Tade touched the mask, a low rumble shook the ground. The students froze, their eyes wide with fear. From the forest, a distant growl echoed, sending a chill down their spines. "We need to leave. Now," Amaka said urgently. The growl grew louder, accompanied by the sound of trees creaking and snapping. It was as if something massive was moving toward them. Tade stuffed the mask back into the box, and the trio ran as fast as their legs could carry them. Branches whipped against their faces, and the uneven forest floor threatened to trip them at every step. Behind them, the growling grew closer, a terrifying reminder of the danger they faced. As they burst out of the forest and into the open field near the hostel, the sounds stopped abruptly. They turned to look but saw nothing, only the still, silent trees. "What was that?" Ao gasped, his chest heaving. "Whatever it was, it didn't want us to take the mask," Tade said. He held the box tightly, his knuckles white. "But we have it now. We're one step closer to stopping Ikaro." Amaka nodded, though her hands trembled. "Let's take it to Elder Ezen. He'll know what to do next." Back at Elder Ezen's compound, the old man examined the mask with a grave expression. "You were brave to retrieve this," he said, "but the journey is far from over. The mask is only one part of the ritual. You must find the drum and the staff to complete the set." He explained that the drum was hidden beneath the school's assembly hall, and the staff was buried near the river where the villagers had betrayed Ikaro. "The closer you come to completing the ritual, the more dangerous Ikaro will become," he warned. "You must remain vigilant." The trio exchanged determined glances. They knew the path ahead would be treacherous, but they were resolved to see it through. The safety of their school, and perhaps the entire village, depended on it. The staff, drum, and mask lay before Elder Ezen on the sacred mat in his compound. The students sat around him, exhausted but resolute. Each item carried its own weight of danger and fear, but together they represented hope. The elder carefully arranged the objects, his hands trembling slightly. "You have done well," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But the hardest part lies ahead. The ritual to pacify Ikaro must be performed at the very spot where he was bound, beneath the foundation of the hostel. That is where his anger is strongest." Tade swallowed hard. "And if we fail?" Elder Ezen looked at him with solemn eyes. "If you fail, Ikaro will unleash his wrath on the entire village. But I believe you will succeed." As night fell, the trio, accompanied by Elder Ezen, made their way to the hostel. The air was thick with tension, and the students who had heard whispers of their mission watched from their dorm windows, too afraid to join. The crawl space beneath the hostel was dark and damp, filled with the smell of earth and decay. Elder Ezen led the way, carrying a lantern. The students followed, each clutching one of the sacred objects. They reached the central point where the hostel's foundation met the earth. Elder Ezen knelt and began to chant in a language older than the village itself. The mask, drum, and staff were placed in a triangle around him. "You must assist me," he said, looking at the students. "Strike the drum in rhythm with my chant. Hold the staff steady and place the mask facing the ground." Amaka took the drum, her hands trembling as she struck it with the rhythm Elder Ezen dictated. Ao held the staff, its weight feeling heavier with every passing second. Tade positioned the mask carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. The ground beneath them began to vibrate, and a low growl echoed through the crawl space. Ikaro's shadow appeared on the walls, swirling like smoke. "You dare disturb me again?" A deep, guttural voice boomed. "We do not seek to harm you," Elder Ezen called out, his voice firm. "We seek to restore your peace and end your suffering." The shadow lunged toward them, its form twisting into something monstrous. Amaka's hands faltered, the drumbeat wavering. "Keep going," Elder Ezen commanded. The ritual reached its climax as Elder Ezen recited the final words. The shadow swirled faster, its growls turning into anguished cries. Tade, Amaka, and Ao held their positions, their fear overcome by determination. A burst of light erupted from the center of the triangle, blinding them momentarily. When the light faded, the shadow was gone, and the crawl space was silent. The oppressive weight that had lingered over the hostel lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Elder Ezen sighed deeply, his face lined with relief. "It is done," he said. "Ikaro's spirit has been pacified. He will no longer haunt this place." As they emerged from the crawl space, the students waiting outside erupted into cheers. Tade, Amaka, and Ao were hailed as heroes, their courage and determination celebrated by their peers. The following day, the headmaster gathered the entire school to thank them and Elder Ezen. "This experience has taught us the importance of respecting our past and honoring the spirits of our ancestors," he said. The trio, however, knew the true lesson. Courage, teamwork, and respect for the unknown had seen them through. Though the footsteps on the roof were no more, the memory of their journey would stay with them forever. And so, the story of Ikaro became a tale told by the fireside, a reminder of the balance between humans and the supernatural, and of 3 students who dared to restore it.